So I think we were mainly inspired by the visual aspect of the piece and how we want it to look. But we were also quite heavily interested in finding a true story or a news story that we can use as inspiration, or a documentary or some kind of like main stimulus that's rooted in reality. A lot of the visual stuff, it was inspiration at first, even though our piece might not necessarily look like that now. And Frida Kahlo was a big part of the visual inspiration as well. So I take art as a second A level, but we knew that we wanted them to look good, and I think that's a big part of Frantic's kind of idea as well, is that visually they are really interesting. We like the idea that she may have been popular without having a terrible accident, but her art was fueled by the bus crash that she was in, and the idea of injury and kind of looking in on yourself and your perception of yourself. And so obviously her self-portraiture is a really big part of that. Once we kind of looked into Frida more, really picked up on the activism side of her life and how her and Diego kind of had that activism was a huge part of their life with the Mexican Communist Party, and how they kind of changed their views, or he changed her views. I think the activism was really, really interesting, especially for the time period. So the main thing that we learned was about the activism, because I didn't know about that before. I don't think a lot of people did. So I think that was a huge part. And the fact that she was so passionate and emotionally driven and a fiery character really inspired us to create something that made a statement, as she did with her views and her activism and her art. I guess that link kind of came pretty naturally between art and activism and politics. Frida Kahlo was massively influenced by politics. I think that link kind of came pretty naturally, and we were also to link in with the kind of news story aspects when we were kind of doing lots of research about terrible things that happened. Most news stories in the last couple of years, especially, for us have been about terrorism, awful things happening, and I think that linked in a way that we thought was really interesting. Charlie Hebdo kind of thing, where it's like, is creating art, that in itself isn't a crime and should not be, but is there a limit to your kind of freedom of speech? Is there a limit to what opinions you're allowed to have, and does it make a difference if it's made public or not? And I think that's where we kind of drew real inspiration from, that kind of stuck throughout piece, and that's kind of the backbone of where we're coming from. So we looked a lot at Charlie Hebdo. I've been looking a lot into people who oppose Islamic views and opinions around Islam, from whether it's inside the religion or from other people. We looked a lot into newspapers and magazines and what they're publishing and how that, and whether it's right or wrong. What we thought was really interesting was the fact that when the Charlie Hebdo thing happened, none of the British newspapers I could find actually published the image that set off the whole shooting thing.
And actually within those articles, they only spoke about the actual shooting event and really didn't give a whole lot of context about why it happened, or who, or any context about Charlie Hebdo that I thought would have been important.
That kind of brought up the idea of censorship and self-censorship, and whether they should have, because should there be more things like Charlie Hebdo that kind of exercise freedom of speech to its full capacity, or should we censor ourselves in order to be sensitive in the public eye? I think it really kick-started a kind of a debate. When kind of acts of terror happen and when we hear about them, there's an overwhelming sense of right and wrong to most people, where no one should be shot in or whatever in the name of religion. However, with the Charlie Hebdo thing, it was a debate, and I think people are still torn about it, and I think that's quite interesting for a debate like that to happen on such a huge public scale, not targeting specifically Islam, but targeting groups of people with certain opinions, and they knew that they were an extremely provocative publishing. The questions are, well, should that have been published? They knew what they were doing. They knew that they were getting threats already. I like the amount of debate that surrounds that specific topic, because it kind of allows for opinions only change if there's debate, and if there's no debate, then kind of nothing changes, and there's no kind of forward there's no momentum to anything that's happening. We realised that actually we don't need to have a piece that has a right and a wrong or a good person and a bad person. Our piece itself doesn't need to be overly provocative in order to actually ask the questions that we want to ask. I think our main kind of key word is responsibility, and we wanted to, and I think it's kind of interesting, the responsibility aspect is always something that can be debated, even in court cases and things like that. Responsibility isn't concrete, and it's not something that can be kind of put into boxes. It's an opinion, it's subjective, and I think that's what we really wanted to look at.
In terms of applying Frantic's style to our work, we kind of started with Frantic and created our piece from there rather than the other way around. So the very first things that we did were by through chair duets, hymn hands, push hands, really built up an understanding of how that works and how you can create meaning through movement, because we thought that was really important considering the really heavy important it was for it to be a visually exciting and interesting and informative piece. So we spent a good 25% of our devising time just focusing on exercises and building up almost like a vocabulary of movement and becoming more comfortable with moving in order to create a more coherent piece and a piece that felt like it was bonded together with really strong roots of movement and of Frantic's style. After seeing Frantic Assembly a couple of different times in performances of Othello, Things I Know to Be True, and a few others between us, we kind of realised that there were parts of those pieces that we thought were really, really poignant, and that even if we saw the play separately, we both remembered specific parts, and that's what we wanted to keep kind of a sense of in our performance, was that there were very clear kind of poignant parts that the audience would pick up on as the important parts of the message. Essentially, we took the movement and all the kind of exercises that we had done from Frantic, and we created those parts off that movement first. Towards the middle of the piece, where we have an argument, that was a part of our hymn hands that we did, and also part of our chair duet that we did from a long time ago, that we then decided seemed like an argument. It felt like we were trying to separate ourselves, so we used that to show our argument. That was an exercise from right at the beginning of the devising process, and it carried all the way through until it felt like it was in the right place. We also liked the idea of involving props and kind of objects within the kind of exercises that Frantic Assembly normally use. So we had a lot of movement with paper, especially on the desk. There was that one sequence at the beginning where we were kind of swapping around paper because we really wanted a strong sense of kind of decision making and disagreement, and kind of we wanted to really show that deliberation process because it was really important to the concept of responsibility. And we brought in the paper, we really felt that it kind of added to the suspense, because as we're flashing paper up, you can kind of get quick flashes of the image, which ended up causing so much controversy. In terms of my own acting ability and how it's improved through our rehearsal process and how I've portrayed my character, I feel that it was really successful in presenting a view that maybe a lot of people don't agree with, but presenting it in a way where it can be understood as a kind of reasonable and not non-controversial opinion. I think it's really important to show that actually we are allowed to have opinions that are maybe not the norm, and that we can present them in a way that is intelligent and respectable, and that we're allowed to disagree with each other, and actually that's not a bad thing at all, and that the debate is really interesting and really progressive. The things I struggle with the most in terms of my acting was presenting a character in a more relaxed and a more natural style, and in a way that felt relatable to people, and a way that felt like a whole new person, like there was a whole other opinion in this rather than me as myself. I think during the rehearsal process, our rehearsals kind of ebbed and flowed in a quite an interesting way, where some days we were feeling less like we wanted to rehearse our physical movement and more that we wanted to focus on character. And so we kind of went backwards and forwards between between the physical acting and the getting up and moving around and our kind of research and keeping new ideas coming in and keeping looking at videos and resources that Frantic had and reading things about them and looking at other theatre companies, other people on YouTube who've done things that we wanted to include in our piece. And I think that really helped to kind of keep our ideas new and to keep us interested in our rehearsals and to keep us kind of motivated through the whole process. It was really important for me to do research on my own as well as to do research with Sophia, because I think that my own opinions and my own thoughts needed to be kind of collected, so that when I present them through my character, Sophia can then respond in a more kind of natural way, and she can see my research and my opinions and all of everything I've collected, to see them through my character rather than me presenting them as myself, where she might not have seen where that fitted into our piece. So it was really important for me to keep both me and my character separate, but also to keep parts of my character almost a little bit closed off in a way, so that I can then present those opinions through smaller details in my acting, through mannerisms and things like drawing on the filing cabinets and picking away at paper, and the way in which that I argued, or our two characters argued. I would say that my character argued in a way that was passionate and very driven, perhaps defying a certain amount of logic that Sophia's character argued with. And I think that was really important to do, because then we could react to each other in quite a natural way, and a way that was believable to the audience as well. Final dialogue that we had between our characters, which was kind of the ending scene in our piece, was a part that we both really struggled with. All of our writing was done separately, so we wrote separately as our two characters, and then we found lines that kind of worked together in order to create a conversation, which kept our dialogue really true to our characters, and that was really successful. We had that dialogue already there, and it was written, and we kind of ad-libbed around it a little bit, but what we found really difficult was finding that place within ourselves where we can do our best to comprehend the situation and how we would be and how a person would be in that situation, where you are confined into an office with the burden and the thoughts that actually someone could come in and could shoot you. And we found that really, really difficult. I think there's a big difference between what you think you would do in an extreme situation and what people actually would do. And so for a long time we were thinking, well, maybe there would be no conversation there, maybe we wouldn't talk to each other, maybe because our views are so opposing and we think it's each other's fault, that we would want to be separate, and we would be bitter and angry and separating ourselves as much as we physically could within that confined space. But in hindsight, and after watching interviews with Luz, who was one of the illustrators in that situation, we decided that actually in extreme situations you cling to whoever is around. There's a sense of we're all here together, we're in the same situation, everything from the past is forgotten. And actually not only looking into that specific attack in Paris, but looking at the Manchester attacks at the concert that were quite recent to when we were researching, and the attacks in London and everywhere else, we kind of realised that people come together regardless of what their opinions are, of who they are, of how they know each other. And so we thought it was really important to both show that we had come together in a way, so we are conversing, we're doing our best to survive and to stay sane, but also the nature of our characters is that we're not afraid of our opinions, and actually I think we still would be debating the rights and wrongs of this situation even when we are in it. And I think for the audience it's really important to hear that conversation, because it rounds off and it really shows the audience what we wanted to show them from the beginning, which is that you can have opposing views through a whole situation and they might never change, and actually neither of you are necessarily wrong in that sense. And I think that when you're so vulnerable, I think it's really important that you show why, and you show that you are but also that you accept other people into that and you allow them to help you or to influence you. So we found that ending dialogue was really important, but we also found it extremely difficult in terms of acting. So it took a few goes to find where it really sat right within ourselves and where it sat right with our characters. And I think that was really important to do, but it did end up being extremely time consuming. I would say the most important part of the rehearsal process towards the end was being able to present what we had. So we showed a younger year group, showed them what we had about, I think it was a week or so before our final performance. We gave them almost no background. We warned them that it wasn't a finished piece and it wasn't final, things were changeable, and we presented it to them and just asked what they thought. We got everyone to write on a post-it note one thing that they liked and one thing they didn't like, and that feedback was absolutely crucial to our final product. We took on almost every comment that they put, because our audience is the most important part of the piece, because we are out there trying to influence people, we're trying to create conversation, and actually if people don't understand, then our piece is void, it doesn't mean anything. So a lot of the feedback we got at the beginning was there was a slight lack of context during the opening, which meant they didn't really know where we were. So after that we added a slide at the beginning which gave our location, and also the belt sequence at the beginning, which not only was extremely reflective of a lot of things that we see in Frantic Assembly, with kind of a symbolic object and something that's really crucial, and there's so much more meaning behind it in the way that you handle something. So we really wanted to handle that belt in a way that was important and symbolic, and people really picked up on that on the second viewing. So that was something that we added afterwards. We also wanted more of a contrast between our characters and when we put the masks on and turned into the terrorists. So I think, although the audience didn't necessarily think that we were the same person, we didn't personally think that there was enough of a contrast physically in the way that we carried ourselves. So we added in kind of rolling movements, and we added in looking at each other and doing a handshake and really uniting as a force there, and we changed our posture so that we were sat upright, and really kind of pushed that we were different people and we had different backgrounds, and maybe the audience don't know who we are and they don't know what we're like or where we're from or what we believe in, but they know that we're different people, and that there's something that we want to do, there's something that we want to tell people.